I thought what would be most helpful, I do a lot of these types of webinars and workshops. And so I thought what would be most helpful is to be a little more tactical and a little less philosophical. But as a bit of a foundation, so I've been teaching entrepreneurship for about 15 years. I run an entrepreneurship program at a university in Cleveland here. And for many, many years, I've been involved with AI, not from a technical standpoint, but from somebody who's just kind of played around with it and been aware of it in many ways. And certainly more recently, in the last couple of years, I've been spending hours every day just playing around with it and seeing how can it help me be more efficient in what I do so that I can be a little bit more effective. And I found it can actually do that in most roles in my life other than as a husband or father. I haven't figured out how to have it help me with that yet, but as a teacher, I found it to be super helpful in terms of being a thought partner and in terms of helping me just kind of be more efficient in developing things and in taking a lot of what I consider to be low value tasks for me off of my plate so that I can focus more on getting to know my students, spending time with my students, working one-on-one with them, and that more kind of personal student-centered approach. So what I wanted to do today was just show you some things that I do and kind of give you a sense of how you might use some of the very simple tools that are out there to, I think you'd find would make a big difference in terms of how you prepare things, but also in terms of how your students can interact with things. So the thing that I do most, right? The tool that I use most is one of a couple. It's ChatGPT or Claude, these sort of chatbots, because they help me get over that blank page syndrome and get started sometimes. And then other times they help me do a really good job of refining what I'm trying to do. Using these things as a skill, and like any other skill, it just takes practice. And so my advice to anybody is always just spend time practicing. Take 30 minutes a day if you're new to this, and just play around with it and start to get used to how it works. And if you've spent a lot of time with these things, then you can dive into some of the more advanced things and the different ways to be able to use this. So I'm going to walk you through a couple ways I use this that go a little beyond the basics, but hopefully you see what I'm doing and you see how I'm thinking about this. And this can be something that can translate over to, people who are in classrooms, people who are teaching, or a variety of other different ways. So there used to be this big thing about prompt engineering, and you had to really work on this skill of developing prompts and how do you ask these things, questions in the right way, the best way to get information out of that. And I found that we've kind of moved beyond that, where you don't really need to know that anymore, because what's happened are there are smart and capitalistic people who have figured out if we can help other people do that quicker, they'll use the tools that we develop. And so there's this whole world of custom GPTs. And think of it kind of like the Mac store or the Apple store, where there are all these things that people develop that will do specific tasks. They're built to only do one specific task, basically. And so there's just a ton of them in here. I would caution people that if you're going to try to use these things, understand that anybody can build them and anybody can put them up here. So it doesn't mean they're good just because they're here. So you want to kind of practice and make sure you understand how these things work. So the one I use most and that I'll talk about here today is this one called Prompt Maker. Ruben's a great guy who developed this. And so, what you do when you find one of these is you click on it and you just start a chat with it. And to show you what this is like, a couple things that I'll use that hopefully are applicable to this audience in terms of, social entrepreneurship or social enterprise, however we want to refer to it. What I can do is I can give this tool what I would say is a bad prompt. In other words, I can just talk to this tool and tell it exactly what I'm looking for, and then it will spit out a much more robust, much more accurate, and I find much more useful prompt that I can then use in these tools to get what I'm really looking for. And so, for instance, in this one, I'm just telling it, you know, I need you to optimize this prompt. So give me something better. And ultimately what I'm doing here is to say, I want students to be able to use you to generate, you know, a business model canvas or a plan template, right? And so from that comes all of this, right? And so it turned this into this. We'll do this into this, right? And so if you look at this, it gives the structure that works really, really well with these tools. It gives the tool some kind of role it wants it to play. It gives it the specific task or objective it wants it to accomplish. And then it gives it a lot more context or detail depending on, you know, what I'm asking it to build out, right? So here it's essentially just saying, you know, your task is assisting students in working on a social enterprise project. They're going to provide you some basic stuff, and then your role is to generate this canvas or detailed business plan, ensuring it has all these elements. So now what I can do, if I want to adjust this to my context, you know, I can go in and I can change some things here and say, well, we're not really dealing with a revenue model yet in my course, right? So let's take that piece out. Or I need to add this piece into it because that's a critical piece of my course. So I can now go and adjust this. But what I haven't had to do is spend the time figuring out how to develop this prompt, right? I get to instead spend my time figuring out how to refine it and improve it. And to me, that's just a much more efficient and effective way to go about it. So then what I can do is I can take that prompt, right? And I can copy and paste that into whatever tool, Gemini or Claude or Copilot, whatever tool I want to use. And, you know, giving this to my students, and what they can do is start having a conversation with it, right? So again, the way I approach it with my students when I'm trying to teach this stuff is I'll show them this, right? And I'll show them that you don't necessarily have to be good at starting the conversation and prompting these things. Other people have developed ways to help you improve on that so that you can just get right into a more meaningful conversation. So, you know, I give this prompt to my students and say, put this prompt in whatever chatbot you're using and start the conversation and see where it goes. So in this case, as I've asked it to do, it's asking me for more information, right? So if I'm a student, it's asking me, tell me more about your idea. Specifically, what problem are you trying to solve? Who benefits? And how's your solution going to work? So it's saying, give me these pieces of information, and then I'll take that information and I'll complete the rest of what you've asked me to do, right? So just to have an example here to show you and run through with you, I was saying like, okay, I'm going to try to solve the problem of homeless people not being able to get the medicine they need. Specific target audience is homeless teenagers. And the idea is to have a virtual doctor system that can prescribe medicine and then using a Bluetooth drone, deliver the medicine to wherever the teen is, right? So I just kind of made this up this morning. So I've given it the context that it's asked for, right? And so now what it does is it goes through here and it builds out some ideas around value proposition, target audience, revenue model, you know, each of the steps that I asked it to do. And what I really like about this kind of thing is that it's going to tell me a little bit about, you know, the social impact that this could possibly have, the business value that this could possibly have. But to me, this is the really cool part here, because it's giving me, if I'm the student, it's giving me questions I can kind of ask myself, or I can continue the conversation here to further refine or develop that piece of it, right? So to say, okay, let's get better with the value proposition piece of it. Think about these kind of questions. What kinds of medical conditions can they handle? Will it be available 24/7, et cetera, right? So it doesn't just give me answers. It gives me answers, gives me some thoughts and opinions, but then it also gives me some direction and some ideas of how to continue my learning. And I think that's part of where a lot of the power of this lies with, particularly with students, is we don't just want them to get an answer and take that answer. We want them to get some opinions and some feedback and maybe some answers. But then we also want them to continue the conversation to be able to dive a lot deeper into this, right? And so what I can do is, you know, I could look through here and I can ask this ChatGPT, follow-on questions, and I can have this conversation with it as long as I want, right? It'll just keep going on and on and on. Eventually, I think it kind of gets a little tired and starts to hallucinate and make some things up. But then I can go back and pick this up from anywhere I want to later on, right? So just one example to say, here's a way to get your students started. You know, if you're working with students on social enterprise, social impact kind of ideas, they may have some basics around the problem they want to solve, who their target audience is, and some general idea that they want to work on. And this is a way for us to really help encourage them and guide them into diving deep on certain elements of, you know, a business model or a business plan, or however it is, you know, people teach it, right? This would take a long time for me to do in a classroom, and it would be a little hectic, and the students wouldn't get any kind of personalized help, right? It would be a little bit more of a general conversation. I might use one or two as an example, but those are the only students that really get that engaged help, right, in a classroom setting. So instead, what I can do is I can give them work like this as homework or things to do outside the class, and then they can bring this into the class, and we can work on this and do some peer work, or you know, somehow get groups working together or whatever, so that, again, they can be more efficient and they can be more effective, and they can get deeper into what they're trying to accomplish by doing this kind of thing. So again, you know, if you go to these in ChatGPT anyway, if you go to these Explore GPTs and you find the one called Prompt Maker, and you play around with that, you'll see how it develops much better and much more sort of robust prompts for you that I think you'll find make you much more efficient and more effective with using these tools. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take the prompts they've given me and I'll paste them into a different one. Sometimes Claude is better for certain things, or Perplexity is better for certain things. Different tools are better for different things, but it gives me somewhere to start, okay? So that's one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to show you was ways to build your own custom GPTs. And sometimes when I do this with audiences, they kind of freak out because they think this is really complicated. And there is a little bit of complication to it, but it's not as bad as you would think. And so the idea here is that if you have, let's say, a skill you want students to practice or anything like that, you can build one of these things and you can give students a link to it, and every student is engaging with the same prompt in the same process, right? So it doesn't depend on them developing their own. You can build it so it does the things you want it to do, and then all of the students are using the exact same thing. Doesn't mean they're going to go on the same journey, but they're using the exact same information thing. So super quick, the way to do this is if you go again to this Explore GPTs, you can create one up here, okay? You have to give it a name, just a little short description of what this thing does, and then you paste in a prompt here that tells it what you want it to do, how you want it to act, all those kind of things. And so this is where that prompt maker again comes in really handy, because I can tell the prompt maker, what I'm trying to do, right? So here I'm basically telling it I need to design a custom chatbot, college teacher. So I'm giving it the context of college teacher, not, you know, 6th grade teacher or whatever. Needs to focus on social entrepreneurship concepts. Students should be able to ask questions, blah, blah, blah. And it gives me, again, a pretty robust prompt, right? So now what I can do is go in and so basically what I did is went in and, you know, I tweaked the prompt a little bit because there were points where I noticed, well, I wanted to only ask one question at a time or different things like that. But I basically copy and paste the prompt in here, right? And I tell it exactly what I want it to do, exactly how I want it to act, okay? And so all of the students would have access to this. For instance, if this were a thing I'm trying to do in my course, I would give this to students and just tell them to play around with it. And I might use it as a discussion assignment where they have to have a conversation with this thing. They have to post a discussion into my learning management system and reflect on it. Or they have to reflect and react to somebody else's, a different student. So it can be part of the discussion, right? And so it's kind of saying like, here I am, what do you want? So, I mean, I have to give my student a little bit of context, but I can say, right, please tell me more about social impact investing. And part of the learning process here is for students to react, I found, is for students to react to the information it gives us. So it's not always going to be right. It's not always going to be complete. It might be very general sometimes. It might be very specific sometimes, but it might be wrong. And so part of what I encourage students to do in terms of responsible use is don't just copy and paste things, right? Use your brain, right? You have to use your brain and you have to think through and maybe do a little bit more research. But in a matter of seconds, right, it's giving students all this information on what it's thinking has to do with social impact investing, right? This is an area of expertise of mine, so I don't know how accurate or how robust this is, but I can tell you there's a lot of information there that the students can then dive into, right? And they can keep going on and on and on with the conversation, right? And it's prompting the students to say, would you like me to explore this, that, or the other thing? And so the student can continue to have a conversation, tell me more about balancing returns and impact. Tell me more about the Acumen Fund. Whatever it is the student's interested in, they can go dive deeper into that, okay? So that's one of them, and I've got 3 here, and again, I'll share this with Andreas, and you can share it with other people. There's a virtual mentor one that I put together where I've trained it acting like people, social entrepreneurs who've successfully launched ventures in fields like biotech, healthcare, environmental conservation, blah, 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 right? And here what I've done is I've given it a document. I've uploaded a document to it because the document contains a ton of information. It contains a ton of information on actual people, on their background, on challenges they faced, that kind of a thing. And so this is where you can upload information. So if you're wanting to create one of these things, let's say, and you want to use certain information as part of its knowledge base, this is where you can put that information, right? And so similarly, I can just type hello to begin, and it wants to know about my idea, because what it's going to do is use that information that I've given it in the knowledge base and take that and use that perspective in that context to sort of mentor me as a student, right? I just have an idea for a drone delivery business to get medicine teams when and where they need it. Right. So I can start, students can start with wherever they are. If they have an existing venture, they've got an idea. If they don't have an idea and they want to try to come up with an idea to solve, some sustainability problem, deforestation, whatever, they can start here. And so what this is going to do again is it's not necessarily going to give me answers. It's not going to give me opinions as much as it's going to kind of prompt me and ask me, right? It does give me some information along the way, and it gives me that sort of guidance, right? But it's also asking me questions. What's the specific gap your need you're addressing, right? And so now as a student, I can go back and I can start to ask more detailed questions about funding, let's say, okay, great, I could explore grants, or maybe I don't know what impact investors are, so I want to know a little bit more about it. Right? And so then it's going to tell me more about that. And so I can just keep going on and on and on with this conversation. And based on the information I've given it, so it's only trained on, what it's trained on, and there's always biases and those kind of issues that come into this, but it's going to help that conversation, and the students can have these conversations outside of class. and they can bring the conversations and things they're learning from the conversations, concerns they have over the information they've received. They can bring all of that into class, and we can spend class time together diving much deeper into this rather than scratching the surface on things, because I can take the scratching the surface work and give that to students to be able to do outside the classroom on their own time, so that our time together is, in my opinion, much more productive and a much deeper level of learning. And so that's really kind of how I use these things. So, if you have certain assignments, you have certain tasks you want them to do. Here's another one where I want students to be able to role play with certain stakeholders, right? And so it's going to ask me which stakeholder I want it to play, right? So the chatbot here is going to play one role. I'm going to play the entrepreneur, the social entrepreneur role. And so it's kind of telling me I can play one of these roles, right? So I'm now cueing it to say, play this role. And again, you can tweak these things however you need to, right? You can have these things play whatever role you need to, and you can kind of program them, give them the knowledge you want them to have while they're playing that role, right? And so it's going to go into actually playing this role and having a conversation with me from that investor role, right? So it's, walk me through your business model. How do you generate revenue? Wants to know about the scalability, wants to know what competitive advantage I have in the market. And so I can start to give it that information, and it will continue to ask me questions, to give me feedback on some things, some ideas, hints. Have you thought about this? Maybe you should do this. Here are some questionable financial projections that, it might ask me in much greater detail about. Okay. And so this just gives you a couple examples. Again, number one, we don't really need to worry about learning how to prompt anymore. If we use that prompt maker, by the way, by using that, we're still going to learn how to do it, because we review it and we see the structure it gives. And then we can take the much more robust prompts it gives us. We can tweak them according to whatever we need to fit our exact context. And then we can use those, either prepare lesson plans, prepare activities, prepare assignments, all those kind of things, prepare entire course outlines. I've built courses and, in fact, entire degree programs using this kind of stuff. Or we can use those and we can create these kind of tools for students, right? Where we can give them prompts and say, hey, everybody use this prompt, do whatever it is that it's doing, and then bring that information back to class. Or I can create these custom GPTs, which essentially is just putting a nice package around a prompt so that the students can have a conversation, and all you have to do is share a link with them and they can have a conversation with this thing. So I can do this for anything I want to do, and I've done this again for specific assignments I have, specific skills, whether that be practicing customer interviewing, because at least my students are terrible at that because they haven't really done that before. They could practice their pitch. They could practice, sharing details with an investor and having that conversation, whatever it is, right? You can have this thing play any role you want it to play, which is really mind-boggling in a way to me. So these are just 3 examples, right? Of you can have students learn some concepts and work on learning concepts. You can have them get some mentoring from the kinds of experts you want them to get mentoring from. So you can kind of use real people if you want and give them the context of the real person, or you can imagine some people and give it the context of those people, the backgrounds, the experiences, all that kind of stuff. And then last, you can do this role play kind of thing. And so these are just amazing ways that are at our fingertips that don't take very long to do. Again, if you're not comfortable with this, if you haven't exposed yourself to this, if you're kind of overwhelmed with things, all I would say is just take 20-30 minutes a day, start to play around with this stuff, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you get to develop some level of expertise in using these things, both for your own work and for being able to create much richer and much more robust student learning experiences, right? And again, my goal with all of this and the way I've approached this since day one is, as Andres mentioned before, is very student-centered. My whole entire experience is driven by wanting to give the students the best, richest, most beneficial and valuable learning experience I possibly can. And these tools have made that exponentially, I'll say easier, although maybe that's not the exact right word, but my coffee hasn't kicked in yet, so I'll use that word. So anyway, a brief overview of some things you can do with just this one tool. That's the other thing I would recommend is if you're not all that used to this stuff, just pick one tool and try it. Don't try to play around with 5, 6, 7 of these things. Just pick one, play around with it. You'll get comfortable with it, used to it. You'll understand the logic behind a lot of these things. And a lot of that will then transfer over to other tools in other areas. So I appreciate the time. Hopefully that's useful. Again, I'll share all this with Andres and you can share it out with everybody. And happy to take some questions or whatever we do next, Andres.